Good evening, everyone. Greetings from Equinox IIIT Lucknow. I am Vinamra Bajaj, your host. We are proud to present to you Equinox Global Conclave, an event under Equinox where leaders, strategists, technology evangelists, and professionals will come together to ideate, share, and express their concerns, opinions, and thoughts about rebuilding the global enterprise. The current COVID-19 pandemic has hit the global market hard, weakening international trade and cooperation. This platform will bring together global leaders from across all sectors to discuss and deliberate, strategize, and to showcase business growth, new operation models, and tech innovations. The conclave gives a golden opportunity to inquisitive minds to interact and get inspired by these leaders. And it is a moment of honor for us to have with us Mr. Alex Cowan, faculty at University of Virginia, Darden School of Business, an entrepreneur 5 times, entrepreneur 1 time, advisor to, and investor in computer businesses. He will be delivering a session on rebuilding the global enterprises for the Global Conclave. Before Darden, Alex was an entrepreneur, starting and selling 2 companies. He is currently at faculty at UVA Darden, where he focuses on digital innovation. He also advises corporations and invests in digital ventures. His venture, Design Framework, is widely used for practitioners and instructors for creating new products in agile hypothesis driven environments. The Agile Development Specialization, Digital Project Management course, and Coding for Designers, Managers, and Entrepreneurs specialization are among his most popular courses on Coursera. This session will surely force you to ponder towards the diversified knowledge of the tech field and will change your perspective towards it. It's a great honor to have you, sir, and now over to you.
Thanks, Vinamar. Thanks for the introduction. I have a few experiences, a few ideas that I'll share with you all, and then we'll take questions. And I'm gonna go ahead, and I have a few things I thought I would show you all, and I will bring those up now. So I wouldn't want to belabor my introduction or biography, but my I actually am a 2-time college dropout, and so my career as a university faculty member is kind of an improbable one in certain ways. The thing that really interested me about what it is that I do now, which is teaching at UVA Darden, and then also on Coursera, where I've served up a 450,000 courses, is the power of digital, is an interest in how to create the kind of talent that I was always trying to cultivate at my companies and on my own part. And so as a kind of someone at a little bit of college, but mostly was self-taught, I always wondered, well, how do we take all these different perspectives? And I think there's a lot of great coursework and programs available to prepare people that fit into these relatively traditional areas. If you want to be a coder, you can get a computer science degree, and it's very good for doing that work. If you want to be a manager of sort of a traditional type, then there are undergraduate and MBA programs like the one that I teach in, and they prepare people pretty well. But that's not the talent exactly that I was looking for at my last company, at least not exclusively. I mean, we had lots of fantastic software developers who I think were quite well prepared for the most part by their programs. What interests me though is what does the general manager of the future look like? Be that product manager, entrepreneur, whatever title these people are carrying around, the nature of global capitalism and business has changed a lot. And whereas in the olden days there was this idea that you should climb up the corporate ladder and go from junior person to senior person to super senior person. I think that certainly that still exists, but I think there's a really big change. I mean, and it isn't exactly new with this the pandemic or our sort of reinvention of the way that we work with each other, but it certainly is coming into its own now. I first started seeing it in 2007 when I started my last company. And what enabled me to do that and succeed in my prior roles, to the extent that I didn't always, but I did sometimes, was an interest in understanding the bigger picture of what I was doing, whether that was on sort of the business side of things, or the technical side of things, and all the sort of important subcategories that exist in both those two big, huge rubrics. And so the question that my work really centers on is, why does so much software that or digital systems end up in the garbage? Because probably, statistics will vary, but, across new products, across new features on existing products that are relatively successful, and even internal IT projects, I mean, just a huge portion of software, probably more than half of it, basically ends up in the trash, lightly used or reluctantly used and not very productive. And I think that's what's interesting about that is the body of practice around building software, deploying and testing software. It is great. I mean, I got to say, there's lots of work to do, and it's always getting better. But that community of practice has really, I mean, they've geometrically plummeted the cost, especially to get an application out the door initially, through really thoughtful tool chains, really great practice, left shifts of developers doing more of their own kind of design and testing work. I don't think the same things happened in the business domain. I mean, product management there's a lot of great work on that, but it is still very much kind of a nascent area of practice. And so what fascinates me about teaching in the MBA program at UVA Darden and online on Coursera to a similar kind of audience across the world is the possibilities that exist for these general managers of the future who don't necessarily fit into one neat, tidy bucket, like this person's a marketer or this person is a coder. And instead, they don't really accept those boundaries. They say, hey, I'm here to understand what everybody's doing to the extent that it's important and help foster interdisciplinary collaboration towards some kind of exciting outcome that we're trying to get together. And if that sounds familiar, that is a lot of what Agile is about in spirit. And I will not go through all the stuff about Agile. I mean, it's a big, huge body of work. And if you're here, you probably have some general understanding of it. I think one fact about Agile is really interesting, which is that the Agile Manifesto, which was released in 2001 and is only 68 words long. And this is basically what it says. I've sort of summarized in this thing right here. That's probably the only thing that everybody would agree is Agile. And Agile is the kind of de facto workhorse for operating a digital pipeline, a digital program, be that a software product or an IT project inside a company, and increasingly even service design and really anything that kind of is a white collar job that people are doing outside of very prescribed things like building civil engineering, building a building, doing things that are very, very well understood and prescribed. And so I think that the thing that I'm interested in doing with the current and future managers that I work with is helping them think about this product pipeline. So most teams explicitly or implicitly go from some observation about something that would be valuable to their customer, be that some kind of external buyer or internal user, over to release product. That is a software experience or a service that this audience can take and react to, and then they're going to observe their behaviors. And with Agile, they're going to iterate a lot, hopefully, and hopefully they're going to do that really thoughtfully, and hopefully they're going to do a really good job of framing some kind of dependent variable about user behavior that helps them think about whether the changes that they just made have made everybody better off or worse off, or haven't really made any difference, in which case they probably weren't a good investment. And I think that a good way to kind of unpack this process and think about how we answer this question of what does this general manager of the future look like in digital, in this sort of larger area of innovation and digital transformation. And I think I like to think about it in these three big chunks that you see here. And I think that traditional development, Agile development, is relatively well understood, even though it's not necessarily always, not everybody's always happy with its practice. And ultimately, it's really a lot about how much content a team is able to get out the door. How many features or how many IT tasks are they able to finish, and maybe how quick can they do that over what sort of intervals? Like, can they get to some work in progress that they begin and finish inside a week, let's say. But while many things are being kind of folded into Agile as it becomes the kind of de facto workhorse of innovation and an increasing share of just white collar work in general, there are these other areas that are really important. Continuous delivery, if you're in digital, you probably heard of, and this has a lot to do with how frequently are we able to release, and do we have automated testing and deployment? Amazon famously releases code every 11.6 seconds, and that is an incredible capability. Not just because it's obviously must be so incredibly well automated and instrumented to be able to do that, and hopefully there aren't too many Amazon engineers up in the middle of the night here in the U.S. Doing upgrades. They've all been happening all the time automatically. I would say for teams to do it, this is going great. What most teams have a lot of upside in is this area of continuous design. So how do we increase the ratio of features with high engagement relative to all the stuff that we're releasing? And I think that's where the teams have a lot of upside. And I don't want to be glib or blithe about it. I work on this. I have lots of startups that I work with. Or that's not really true. I have a couple of startups that I do a lot of work with, and then a lot of startups that I do a very, very tiny amount of work with. But I grapple with these things myself still, and I'm always trying to get better at it. And so what I've found has been working really well for myself as a practitioner, the people I work with directly, and then my students that I teach in the degree programs and online, is this idea of thinking about the continuous design process in this framing of hypothesis-driven development. And the idea is that we unpack whatever it is we're doing into problem versus solution. And words are faulty instruments. What's the problem that Facebook solves? I mean, it's more of a desire or a habit or whatever. But these, whatever you want to call it, the sort of extant existing thing that you're doing for the user or proposing to do for the user. What is that? How do you learn about that? How do you find out who that user really is? What kind of shoes do they wear? How would you identify whether a given person off the street is or is not this persona? And then what underlying jobs or problems or habits or desires are on their A list? Because if you don't know who that person is, or you solve a problem or do a thing for them that they don't really care about, nothing that you're going to do subsequently is going to matter. Just all going to be pretty much waste. And then we can pair this with a demand or value hypothesis about this is really what, in my framing of this stuff, at least, this is where the work around lean startup comes into play and is a really fantastic tool for doing this. And the basic idea there is that we frame our ideas in testable terms. Like, if we offer this software product that does X, then so-and-so person will come and buy it to do so and such a thing, and they will pay Y dollars. It's obvious, and simple maybe in retrospect, but having those testable framings is really important for teams so that they are test driven and they have something that they're deciding whether they're accomplishing or whether they need to retread and think about what they're doing before they go and create a lot of output that doesn't matter. And then finally, this is probably what most people are most familiar with, and most teams out of all these things probably do best, is usability design and engineering. How do we make an interface that's highly usable? But likewise with this other thing, if we have gone and we're offering something that nobody wants, and we make it highly usable, that's irrelevant. And that's not an academic hypothetical thing that might happen. I see, especially out here in Silicon Valley, where I live most of the year, I see lots of beautifully designed, usable, or sometimes just good looking products that nobody wants. They get released, they look great, but then they encounter this echoing silence. And then the team's unsure what to do because something in this earlier set of hypotheses was murky or non-validated. And so what do they do now? And so this is something, this approach to continuous design, and boy, it sounds like probably a lot of work, but the reality is this was always a lot of work. To get a good outcome here, it was always super difficult. If you have a team that is consistently releasing content features that see really terrific engagement, whether that's an external or an internal product, that is a team that's working really hard at something to make that happen. It rarely happens. It's wildly improbable that a team would just go off and build stuff and get those kind of results. So this may seem like a lot of stuff, but what I would say, and I don't operate in any pretense that this is the one and only way to approach digital products or projects, but I think that a test-driven approach to all these things is the best way to think about, well, should we be doing design thinking or product design or lean startup or lean UX or DevOps or words are faulty instruments. But if you're doing these things and you're operating your pipeline and you're getting good metrics on these things, and you're getting good metrics on how users are responding to what you're building, then I would say you're running a good program, at least at the team level, and that's a huge win. Most teams aren't doing that, and most of them aren't doing it because it's really hard to integrate all these skill sets together and get everybody to work together and have a shared understanding that they really care about and buy into. And so the thing that Agile is, this says marketer, I really meant this to say manager. The most important thing with Agile, I would say, are these things, that we're able to balance outcomes over just generating a lot of output. So for example, if we're implementing, if we're on an internal project, like we're implementing SAP or a Salesforce CRM or something, are we making sure that users are successful using the product, and not just like we walk over them and we say, is this okay? And they're like, sure, it's fine, whatever, just leave me alone and do my job. But we're observing what they do, and that dovetails with what we intended. Or, with the product, it's usually a little more obvious and existential, that we're able to move towards products instead of just projects. So rather than just saying, all right, we're going to do this thing, and then if it's on time and on budget, that just, is a success, we're able to look at it and say, what is the underlying job or habit or desire for the users that we're servicing? And how do we know if we're making that better or worse, or we're making it better with regard to the alternatives? And then finally, that rather than doing or arguing, there's a lot of testing of both of ideas as well as functional things, like the way the software works. And so to kind of take a simple example, what if we had a talking bicycle compass? Then, the kind of older way, and I'll call it scale friendly because it is highly scalable, but it's just not very innovation friendly. The old way we would do this, if we had the idea, hey, people who go on long bike rides would enjoy it more and be more adventurous in the routes that they take if they had a device that would give them verbal guidance so they don't have to take their eyes off the road. Then in the olden days, we would write a plan, raise a lot of money, make what we think is the perfect product, cost engineer it, make sure we can get it out to retail and get lots of distribution so it can scale up. Maybe at the last minute, test it with a focus group to see what they say, but what are we going to do at this point, in responding to that? And then hope for the best. And, it's not like nothing's ever worked, but in following that process. Sometimes that process is successful, but it is a lot riskier and a lot more expensive than the innovation-friendly alternative, which is something like, we first go out and we go talk to a bunch of cyclists. Hey, why are you out here doing this? What do you like about it? What are the top 5 things that you most enjoy? And what are the top 5 things that you wish were better or are difficult or annoying or whatever kind of feels like the right word? We're not trying to collect statistically significant data when we go out and talk to these people. We're trying to get high quality, individual qualitative observations that we can use to put together some vivid and ultimately testable hypotheses about who these people are and what's on their A list. And then we would build, a very, very simple version of this product, or better yet, we would build an MVP, which is really not a product at all. if possible. This stands for minimum viable product. You've probably heard about this. You may have heard about this with regard to lean startup. And the idea is to ask, how can we test that demand or value hypothesis that I mentioned at the middle of those two diamonds without going and spending all this time and money to go and build out a fully fledged product? So could we, for example, call these people, turn on location tracking, duct tape a smartphone to their bike, and just give them verbal guidance and see how they react to that and kind of see how that process works to think about if and how we should build a talking bicycle compass. And teams really do this. I really do this. I've seen it work. It really works well. And it works in consumer products. It works well in business products. Then we build the most simple version of this bicycle compass that hopefully is amenable to change in the sense of being, software upgradable and so forth. And on a success basis, we iterate on it and we change it and we add things. So that's kind of a contrast and sort of a simplified example of how this stuff works. And so I think what's really exciting for general managers or engineers that are curious about broadening what they do eventually is the fact that so much software ends up in the trash. The figures are debatable, and you can ask whether certain figures really apply to this or that company, and those are all reasonable. But if you've been in the business a while, you've probably seen a lot of features, IT projects, and new products flop. And it's a pretty persistent reality, even as the software development process has just gotten so much better in so many ways. So how do you prepare a general manager to do this stuff? Well, my perspective is that, I didn't explicitly show this here, but at Darden, obviously, we're starting from very high functioning business people who are getting a master's in business. That's a 2-year program, and the first year is spent on general management stuff. So the leadership and accounting and stats and some intro to coding and the integration of all those things. And in the second year, they have electives, and those that are interested in this area will take electives that deliver these things. And I think that the skill of product management of how do we go out and test product market fit and then take that and use it to create high quality collaborations across disciplines, for example, in digital design, development, test, deployment, marketing, even sales and G&A, legal stuff. That is the kind of one of the anchor elements here. And then this process of continuous design that I've mentioned and this hypothesis-driven development is kind of the meat of the actual practice of that area. And then, gosh, I'm so sorry. I probably that might not have been the right term, but the real substance of continuous design is going out and talking to users, running MVP experiments, doing usability testing, stuff like that. And then managing with Agile, I think is a useful thing to understand, mostly on a project-based execution. I think there's a lot of Agile certifications out there, and they're fine, but like my material, for example, I spend very little time in the context of the whole item, my Coursera specialization, on what is, for instance, Scrum or XP or these various Agile methodologies, and I spend most of my time on this and literacy around continuous design and delivery. And the reason for that is I don't think that those methodologies are very important, and there's so many of them that if you have a good program running on continuous design, you're going to kind of pull and create successes that breathe their own air and kind of bring the right ideas into the team and have an easier time facilitating the way to really strong practice with that team. Then I think doesn't it sound strange that a business school would have a class on continuous delivery and DevOps? And in fact, we don't, but I do offer one on Coursera, and we do teach this material in some of the courses that I do. Like we have a capstone course on digital. But I think that what's fascinating about this, and how do we go from horrible once monthly releases that somebody has to stay up in the middle of the night and do to releasing code every 11.6 seconds like Amazon, or getting closer to that. I think that that is just as much of a technical issue as it is a kind of managerial, and how do we kind of create space to build that infrastructure and cultivate it and keep it healthy. So I really enjoy teaching in that area. And I, you know, it is, in a way, it's so easy because the tool sets and the points of view on how to do it are so extremely well developed and articulated. In between these things, digital literacy is a huge topic in my teaching, and one that is I've learned a lot of things that are very non-obvious. One is that the solutions that are available in most degree programs, and even in most non-degree programs like coding boot camps, explicitly or implicitly, those are all really designed for people that are going to be career computer scientists, career coders. And I think it works great for that. And it's a really good program. For the general manager, it is, those courses have a lot of things that aren't particularly important to them, or are very difficult and yet, and take up a lot of time, like setting up a dev environment, or certain things like recursion, or how do we diagnose the complexity of an algorithm. And it lacks a lot of stuff like thinking about how they can use the experience of getting some code to work and analytically debugging it as kind of a microcosm of understanding what their collaborators in that area are going to be doing as they go off into the world as general managers that are in digital. And so what I've learned works really great, and I have a whole bunch of them online that I'll show you a link for, and they're completely free on my website, are case-based teaching of coding. And again, this isn't to say I think all computer science education should be like this. I think that the computer science education for career computer scientists and career coders is probably great, and it really isn't my area of expertise, frankly. But for these general managers, I think there's tools and things that allow them to do kind of a design first, substance first take on coding. So rather than like, let's bottom up all these technical facilities, that we're able to say, all right, here's this basic idea of how, you know, JavaScript works, or HTML and CSS interact, and how might you make this thing happen with that, rather than, you know, kind of going from the bottom up. And not to say that HTML and CSS is a big topic in traditional computer science education, but it is a pretty useful topic for these people that are kind of starting from the user experience and then going deeper and deeper into how that actually is effectuated. And so these are some resources that I offer. These are all completely free things that are on my website. There's some notes on this venture design and hypothesis-driven development here. The cases, the courses that I mentioned are here. The Coursera courses there's a free and a paid version, but the cases that I mentioned for digital literacy are all completely free and available on this site. And this is my contact information. So those are the experiences and stories that I have to offer. And I thought I would close with some examples of what these students have done, because that's the thing ultimately that really excites me. And so these are a few students that I had in my digital capstone class, which has a product design and digital software design, a software development, and a data science elective as prerequisites. So they've done these things, and they're coming into this class with a project that they've been working on. They've been designing and coding and doing analytics and data science around, and they're really like bringing it to life and iterating on it and integrating the practice of those things. And this has been working really great. It's probably my favorite class to teach, mostly because the students have already internalized so many really neat skills that they can apply, and that's so transformative and interesting for them. Anyway, this first one is a project where the students built a model in Python, deployed it in Flask, and you can give voice commands and have it pull up data, like show me sales from last month of, you know, this certain category. And so these folks went through user stories, discovery. They went from low fidelity to mid fidelity to actual working code. They integrated a WordPress site, which they added their code on top of. I know WordPress is horrible, terrible, but it actually is pretty good for getting a 1.0 of a lot of different things kind of out the door, up and working in kind of a reasonable fashion. And then that had an API over to this data science model that was deployed in Flask, which is a Python framework for deploying data science models and making them available. And this next one is this actually just finished. This student is a dual degree MBA medical doctor student who built a system for medical students to, this is sort of solving a problem that he observed. It is a system for medical students to practice ultrasound exams and make decisions, clinical decisions about what they ought to do. So this is a thing for medical students, and they brought this to life and got it fully working. And it's online now. And then this last one here is a project from last year. These folks had the idea that they would, like if I have a shirt that I really like, what other shirts that, you know, would fit me like that should I buy, and what sizes should I get? You know, if I'm a size X in this one brand, but I want to try this other brand that's sort of similar, what sizes should I get? What cuts? I know buying clothes for me is always kind of confusing. So this is something where you can go, and they have this sort of progressive wizard type interface where you pick sizes, and then they're actually running this algorithm with all these sort of measurements that they've collected and models that they've created to kind of interpolate between things. And this will allow you to go and click through and you know, find your next really cool shirt. And so I think it's pretty neat. And so so this is what I've been after. How do I help cultivate general managers that know how to go from idea to design to code and work with the team to really bring their ideas to life? And so any questions you have about that, I would love to have. And those are kind of the prepared things that I thought I would show you all.
So that was, in simple words, really amazing. And there are many questions by the audience now. So Ayushi Pant asks, is intensive testing a good trade-off in comparison to quicker deployment?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think, well, it's hard to answer these questions in simple terms, but my gut reaction would be, no. You know, because, and I'll just tell you specifically what I mean by that and my experience with it. You know, in test, we had, in my last company, I was, you know, in part helping make decisions about this, which were mostly not very good decisions. We had too many system tests, not enough integration tests, not enough unit tests coverage. And so we weren't investing in the right places. And also I didn't do a good job of prioritizing what to test. So of course the test team, like most test teams, always had a big long backlog of stuff they wish they could have tested before we deployed, before we went live, or before we shipped a version to customers. And I think that's pretty common. And what I learned from that is two things. I mean, there's a lot of tactical things that I could have done better, and I didn't really know about the test pyramid, you know, and the right disposition of tests. Maybe I should have, but I really didn't at that point. And but the other thing, and I think the most interesting thing, and the thing that I most consistently hear from teams that are making good decisions about this, and by good, I don't mean perfect all the time, or they never have issues in production, is that they work in small cycles. So, you know, the reason I originally said no is I think they're kind of balancing how much testing they're doing with how much deploying they're doing and their ability to, for instance, roll back. And they're running good retrospectives for the issues that made it out to the customer or the field, if it's kind of an internal issue, or to production. Why did those things happen? And how do we do kind of like 5 whys and really look in a blameless but very clinical and sincere way at why those things happen? And let's let that help us think on an iterative basis about the right test and deploy investments to make on the next go. Because otherwise, I think it's impossible to consistently make good decisions about where to invest your time. You know, because you could perfect your testing, perfect your deploy infrastructure forever. You know, it's not that hard to do, and never learn what's actually going to break. You know, when the thing goes out there is my personal experience and what I learned from interviewing a bunch of practitioners when I was doing my continuous delivery and DevOps course. Does that answer your question though, or did I kind of miss the mark on your intent?
Yes, I guess that was a really practical answer due to how you were able to inculcate what actually you faced also.
And I
So,
also I just think there's so many interesting alternatives now. Like for instance, I'll go talk to a lot of teams that are like, well, we kind of use the test framework, but we also use feature flags. So that there's this whole school of thought that like testing is going to go more and more empirical, especially at the upper layers of the test stack. You know what I mean? So like rather than writing really great system tests or maybe even like kind of upper level integration tests, we're just going to deploy everything to a really teeny subset of customers, have great observations about what should be happening in our baseline. And if something goes wrong, just roll it back and then try to figure out what broke, So I think that's another, but should you do that or should you do more testing? Well, the best way probably for a given team is to try it out and minimize the blast radius, but see what happens.
okay. So the next question is from Shashwat. He asks, frequent releases might mean more faulty releases. How do we tackle that?
Frequent releases might mean what?
More faulty releases.
More faulty releases.
So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, how do you tackle it? That is a fascinating question. I can send this along. I would go here and try to pull it up, but both 𝐶ircle and what is Jez Humble wrote this book, Continuous Delivery, which is kind of this like seminal book on the area. And he is part of a consulting and research group now. Both of those studies found that teams that were, this is the amazing and super exciting finding, teams that were deploying the most frequently had the least issues in production. Isn't that amazing? And it's very counterintuitive, but yet I think what was going on, and this was all very empirical, because the 𝐶ircle study in particular was people that opted in to let the tool see what was happening, and on an anonymous basis report what happened. And like did we have to roll back, and all things that the tool would have been like directly in line to probably. And I think that what's happening is that because I've done this, it's Saturday night, we've got a relatively manual upgrade process without as much of a deployment automation or test automation investment as maybe we should have made. Somebody's looking at a PDF or a set of notes, and there are just so many places to make mistakes. Same thing for testing. And so I think that I think it's glib to say that automated testing and deployment is a slam dunk, because it takes a lot of investment, especially if you're doing it retroactively, to get it to work. But according to these studies, there is this incredible result that if you can get this infrastructure up and running, you're going to be able to release and learn quicker. You're going to have fewer issues, so less anxiety, less calls, less customers having bad experience, less downtime. And it probably seems really. I would not have believed that 10 years ago if somebody told me. I'd say that sounds like propaganda from people that make this stuff or whatever. But I think these, as far as I can tell, these studies. Again, the one by Jez Humble's group and the one by 𝐸ircle, which 𝐸ircle is a commercial CI tool. I think they're, from what I can tell, they're pretty credible. I haven't heard any big questions about how they got to those results.
So
did that answer their question, or did that sound like a bunch of nonsense to them? I would love to know.
I'll surely tell if they say something about that. So next question is from Harshit. He asks, you have told us about what are the skills of a general manager for tomorrow. But if right now a student comes to you and asks you, what should the skills he have to be an ideal employee for tomorrow? So what are the skills that the student needs at this moment right now?
Yeah. Well, and do you think this is one of your classmates, meanwhile, like students getting an engineering degree right now?
I think he's one of them only.
Yeah. Okay. Then I would say, you kind of have to. So number one, there is no one yellow brick road always that everybody should take. God knows I didn't follow one. I dropped out of college twice. I only have a high school diploma. I've had just as many failures as I've had successes. I think that if I was in a program like I understand you all to be in, and I was going to go work as in a technical role of some sort right after school, if I was in a position to do that, I think I would go do that. But I would do, if I was a young, energetic undergraduate, I would do two things mainly with a good technical training, which I was not, and I am not. But if I was, I think I would do two things, and I've seen two things work really well. One is, I would try to find, take whatever your first role is and do it really well, because it's your first job and you got to sort of learn the ropes. But take an interest in learning how the overall infrastructure works. And so, for example, if your team is trying to get to more frequent releases or trying to left shift some of the testing so that developers do more of their own test coverage, take an interest in that and participate, or try to find a team that's doing those sort of things is the first thing I would do. And then the second thing I would do is, if you're asking yourself, well, how do I either know whether I want to go and be a general manager or product manager, say, and B, how do I get that job? Because they said, well, we want people with 2 years of experience, and I don't have any experience. I would have a side project, a nights and weekend thing. If you're young, you got a lot of energy, and go put yourself through the paces of, going from 0 to 1 with some kind of project. Even if it doesn't work out, you'll learn a ton. And there are a lot of things that will probably still, seem very abstract to you if you don't do that. That'll seem very concrete and somewhat kind of understandable to you in a company role if you have done that, I think.
I guess I can even take some lessons from that. So the next question is from Saksham. He is asking that in the search for the perfect process answering all edge cases, it is easy for sprint/agile planning to become overkill. So what are your views on that?
Well, it's very similar to my answer on the balancing testing and deployment question. I mean, ultimately, hopefully, a team is given their own discretion about their particular practice of Agile. And so there's this famous paradox in Agile. You can't fix command and control with command and control, which is very central to the management part of making Agile work. I mean, the idea that Agile is a different way of doing project management is a thing, and I mean, there's a lot of people that have the job title project manager. They're getting trained in Agile, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. But fundamentally, Agile is not like traditional project management. It is a radical. I mean, the idea is the team is self-organizing. People are, being given a charter and a point of view on how they align with a larger organization and what constitutes success. And they're being given the discretion to figure out how to do that themselves in small batches, where there's observation. And so, I would say, I mean, you walk into a given company, especially a big one, and you ask people, how's Agile going? I think they're going to hear exactly what you're suggesting. It's too much. There's a lot of overhead. I hate it. It's just this thing that the company makes us do, because it is, but the right answer. So how do you fix that? There's one way, and it's not easy, but it's very singular. And it is to say, hey, look, these teams can and should iterate on their own practice of Agile. So if I walk in, so as long as that's the case, I walk into a team and say, how's your, Agile going? And they say, it's terrible, it stinks. Well, that's their fault, because they've been empowered to, make it their own and fix it themselves. That's not what I would lead with. If I was a senior manager, I would ask them, well, what's going wrong? And what do you think you should do to fix it? And really impart that, we're weird, people are not wired to, our emotional wiring is thousands of years old. It's not necessarily super well adapted to doing the kind of work that we do today, So we're thoughtful people. We can understand these things, but at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of hairless apes that want to be loved. And, sometimes we want to be in control and sometimes we don't, we love to get a to-do list and we love to hate it, but we also love it. So, I think that really the key is even if it's on a gradual basis with like one or two teams at a time, taking that leap of saying, you guys are in charge of you're in charge of you're accountable for your results, but you're in charge of your own practice of Agile. And so if you're not liking the way that it's working, then, my question is, what do you think you ought to do to change it? And what's preventing you from doing that? So, that's my answer. And I'm not trying to say it's easy to do, especially in a big company, but that's the thing that I ultimately see improve the situation in most of these places from the kind of thing you mentioned, which is absolutely very prevalent.
So, Harshdeep asks, you told us that 90% of the new products fail. So what is the mantra or the secret behind that 10% success ratio? What can one do to, be in that 10% rather than being in that 90?
Well, there are two things. One is the kind of things that I mentioned, and two is luck. But here's the thing. Even if you run a really disciplined program, you're like the kind of stuff I mentioned, your odds of being successful are, you might double them. So you have like if somebody else not doing these things is a 1 in 10 shot for a given iteration, you have like a 1 in 5 shot. But the exciting part is you're getting 5 times as many chances. And so it really is the, what's the secret of these products? A lot of them, people got lucky. And they didn't necessarily run a super disciplined process, but a lot of them, they did to a certain extent. And that is true of like Dropbox is an example of people cite of, they in a way they did run a very, they ran an MVP, they observed signups. So I think that the being ready to test your ideas and not just build them and kill them if they're not working, just scrap them in order to prune away what's not working and make room to do something else, that's probably the number one thing. So I think the premise of Lean Startup is not that it will automatically put you in the 10%, but it's that it'll give you 5 chances at being successful for the price of 1, doing it the old way. And that, if you think about it, just arithmetically, that's pretty compelling. It's not an automatic win. I think that's, anybody who says they have a recipe to always make a startup successful isn't, is overgeneralizing or something. But if you think about it, I think that ability to make, have more shots at being successful is extremely powerful. And it's really a big deal at corporations as well, because they'll invest in a lot of innovation programs. And when I go in, as I do a lot of the time, and I talk to the teams, I asked them like, well, what, you have this innovation pipeline. What's the kill ratio on these projects? Like how many of them, how many of these like 90-day pilots get canceled? And if like none of them get canceled, they all go for it, then I know there's a problem, because nobody's going to hit 100% of these things, especially if they've done a whole bunch.
So the next question is coming from Orunair. The question is, for any startup, do you think starting with Agile is the best way or not? Your views on that?
Yeah, very broadly construed. Yeah. I am testing some new concepts for online courses, and I did all this stuff. I worked with one other person, and every week we ran a series of smoke tests with Google AdWords, and we looked at where we were getting evidence of demand before we built anything. And we moved on, and we iterate through production together. So, in the sense of working in small batches where you have some kind of finished thing at the end of each one, and being explicit about how you're going to do things, I think that, in that sense, it absolutely is the right way to go. Yeah, even if you're a team of 1, it's a good way to manage yourself. But obviously, you don't need an extremely formal or an overly formal Agile methodology like, an orthodox Scrum or XP or something. You don't need to necessarily do all that stuff.
So the next question is coming from Bhanu. He's a student of yours on Coursera. So I guess I can frame this question also better. So we saw that in the past year how we all were locked up in our homes and the importance of MOOCs, the importance and availability of MOOCs has gone up. Coursera made it free for campuses also last year.
Yeah,
So,
which was so
what do you
great.
think about the future of MOOCs in like various countries? Like talking about India and I guess even United States, the like to get a good quality education. If you think of going to a good university or a good program, it's either too much costly or maybe totally out of reach of many students. Like either you need to have that financial backing or that you need to be in that niche crowd. So, what is the future of MOOCs considering how things have panned up in the last year?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And I don't know about the Indian market for higher ed, but in the U.S., the cost of undergraduate and graduate education has been outpacing inflation by an outrageous, margin for decades. Well, not forever, but I think for the last 20 or 30 years. Yeah, well, it's interesting. My understanding of when Coursera was founded, that was kind of their thesis, was we're going to be college for everyone on the internet in a box. And that's what they thought they'd do. But that's not what actually happened. What happened was their learners were disproportionately people who already had an undergraduate degree, and even disproportionately already had a graduate degree. So there's some kind of, at least, at that point, and I think still to a large extent, there's still this need to kind of learn how to learn and manage yourself in this way. And I think that we do not have, particularly for undergraduate education, there is not an alternative for doing that that's great right now. There are some really exciting alternative undergraduate education vehicles. There's one, gosh, what is it called? I can't, I've been to a couple of events. A lot of the Coursera alumni work there. But they, for instance, have,
University of People, like I've been seeing this going on these days. There's a University of People, like it's all online and maybe so
Yeah,
that's
well, actually, this place, I'll look it up. Minerva is what it's called, Minerva School. No, they actually, it is a residential. I mean, probably it isn't this year, but it's a residential program. But they relocate the students across these different campuses across the world. But what's really interesting is that they, for instance, have these year-long courses, which are, there's like a class on systems, and they, it's the first year class is based in, in biology, but then so they start off with like the science of biology, but then they do these empirical studies and they code things in Python to look at these, the statistical evidence. So it's kind of thing that, because of the department infrastructure of most universities don't do, they don't have nice integrated classes like that. So I do think that there are opportunities to do these things. And, I think it's a great question because, you look at MOOCs getting more and more prevalent. Are they getting better or not? I don't know, but there's certainly more of them all the time and more people taking them. And the cost of education, and you think, well, there's a lot of tension here. So it's a good question to ask. I think Coursera's initial experiment with it didn't work that well, but are there alternative? I think that the most interesting question for undergraduate education, I mean, here's the thing. I think it's really different answer for undergraduate and graduate education. I'll say that. I think that for graduate education, for a lot of things, MOOCs are extremely compelling. And, that I'm not, that's a pretty obvious thing. edX, which is, I think, the 2 or 3 Coursera is usually number 1. I mean, that they have these nano degrees they have other things, but they have nano degrees now where you take this online course and you get provisional credit if you're admitted to, say, the computer science masters at Georgia Tech. And I think that was an extremely relevant, innovative take on graduate education. Or you don't go to that program, you took the MOOC, it was either enough or you hated it and you spared yourself this master's degree that you wouldn't have enjoyed. Or and this work that you wouldn't have wanted to do, let's say. For undergraduate education, so I think in graduate education, MOOCs are really going gangbusters and very increasingly tightly integrated into the degree programs. I think for undergraduate education, from what I understand, it's not my area of expertise. I don't teach any undergraduates at UVA. I only teach in the MBA and this Masters of Science in Business Analytics we have. I think for undergraduate education, we really are still at, more or less at like ground zero. We're in the Lycos is the search engine, and there's dial-up internet access equivalent phase of like what's next for undergraduate education. That said, I have 2 kids, one's 7 and one's 4. I'd say it's a 50-50 that they go to a traditional residential undergraduate degree program like I do.
Okay, so I guess that is where we wrap up the session. So it has been a brilliant one. There have been many witty laughs and a lot of information that we have been able to gather. And your journey has been amazing, and to get to listen to it is a really enlightening experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to thank you on behalf of IIIT Lucknow and Equinox. It was a pleasure to have you over this platform and to get to learn from you. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again today in the evening at 6. We'll be having Mr. Sorry. We'll be having Mr. Lakshar. We'll be having Mr. Huzaifa Laksharwala. He's an associate director at PwC. Hope to see you all. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
No, thank you for coming. It was wonderful. Please feel free to get in touch, and good luck with whatever you all are doing.